Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to talk about selecting measuring instruments, and I'm sorry if I fly through this. There's a lot of material to cover, and YouTube only allows me to upload 15-minute videos. So let's get to it. Definitions, okay? You can look at these in your book as well. We'll be asking about these in the quiz, very likely. An instrument. What is an instrument? What is a piece of data? And what is a construct? This construct is very important in research because mostly a lot of the times what we're trying to measure in research are constructs, and these are abstractions that can't be explained sort of directly. Some examples are intelligence, personality, socialization, motivation, that type of thing. Operational definitions are very important. Just because you say you're studying mentorship, there could be 100 definitions of mentorship out there, and we don't know which one you're studying until you actually operationalize that definition and let us know what it is that you're studying for. The research design, this is key. This is really essentially your final assignment, looking at writing a research methods paper, and this is what you're going to be doing. The research design is a key part of that assignment that you're doing. Okay, the purpose and the function of a design in qualitative is really to isolate the effect of the independent variable, minimize it, neutralize it, eliminate it for the effect, for the purpose of affecting the dependent variable. Okay, this is really essentially isolating the independent and being able to use it to be able to measure the dependent variable. I'm sorry. Steps in conducting research: identifying a researchable issue. We've talked about that already. Developing a research question we haven't talked about yet, but we will. Conducting a lit review we've talked about. Developing a hypothesis we've talked about a little bit. Developing a design and a methodology. Key assignment again for your final assignment. Conducting a study, which you're not going to do. Conducting analysis and writing a report and submitting for publication. These three we really don't cover too much, but it is part of conducting research. Okay, developing a design methods. First you select your participants, then you select your instruments and measurements, and I'm going to probably have another video that goes through an example of how to do that and the procedure for data collection and analysis. You write those up. Characteristics and quantitative. Okay, when you select participants, you must control for inter-subject differences, okay, such as gender, race, ethnicity, whatever, that's internal, and also situational differences, that's external. So this is internal and this is external, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward in this presentation here. Okay, quantitative, remember this is quantitative. True experimental. Remember, true experimental requires random assignment. Okay, you must state who the participants will be and how many participants will there be. Okay. Qualitative now. Okay, we're looking at qualitative. It involves a little bit more: who they will be, how they will be contacted. Because remember, we're dealing with very few cases here. What is the expectation for sample size? And remember, this always comes with a range, okay? And where they might be observed or interviewed. The reason this is important is because a lot of times for this we want, sometimes if you say Starbucks or somewhere and the environment is not conducive to conducting an interview, then we might ask you to change that. So it's important to think about that. And what is the length that you've gone to establish rapport? Okay, rapport is a very important word in qualitative research. You should look that up and understand what that is and understand how important that is in when you're dealing with qualitative research. So the goal of the instruments is to accurately and consistently measure what it is that you're trying to measure, and that you have instruments that are appropriate for the individuals that you're assessing. And we'll talk about a little bit about this more later. So the goal, procedures, the goal is to collect data in a way that avoids problems or inaccuracies due to flaws in the research design. So it is your responsibility as a researcher to develop a research design that is sufficiently of high level to avoid these problems and inaccuracies. You got to do two things to do this. Okay, you got to think about internal validity and external validity. Internal validity are the things that you do that help create a sound research design. External validity are things that you can't control, like the weather, that type of thing. But nevertheless, you have to think about those, and you have to think about how they're going to affect your study, and how your study may not be generalizable if you don't understand the effects of external validity to your research. Okay, the type of instruments, this is just terminology. You have this in your book as well. What a test is, a standardized test, everybody knows what that is. Everybody takes them to come to Fresno State, generally higher education. Assessments, what are assessments, measurements, and performance assessments. Raw score, these are just ways of interpreting the data. Raw score is basically the number. You'll be getting a raw score for your quizzes, and you have normed reference scoring. This is grading on a curve. I don't grade on a curve, but some people do, and this is called normed reference scoring. This is the exact terminology. Then you have criteria reference scoring, and then you have self-reference scoring approaches, and your book will give you a more defined definition of all of these. Three most cognitive types of measurements in education, okay? The first one is cognitive, okay? Cognitive tests, they measure things like intelligence, constructs. Remember we talked about constructs earlier? This is what we're trying to measure. And the way to do that, you have achievement tests, such as, the GRE, right? The GRE, the SAT. Diagnostic tests that are going to help diagnose or let us know weaknesses and strengths. And then you have aptitude test. Aptitude test and achievement test are sort of similar in some ways. But these are really the GRE and the SAT fall under aptitude. And then the second one is effective tests. These are going to measure things like emotion, interests, values, and behavior. You have a bunch of different type of scales. You have Likert scales. Everybody knows what a 5-point Likert scale. This is a very common terminology in research. Make sure you understand what that is, the 5-point Likert scale. Okay, you have semantic differential scales, rating scales, Thurstone scales, and Gutman scales. And you have inventory assessments, value tests, and personality inventories. Potential problems with self-reporting of instruments, that participants need to be assured anonymity. You have to protect anonymity. And you have to also control the population that needs to be taken into account to minimize how demographics may affect the results. Okay. The third one, is projective tests. Okay, these are tests that are used to sort of project and to understand sort of racial bias, gender bias, that type of thing. And the most famous projective tests that we know are the Harvard implicit test, and I believe this is still the website. You can double check. If not, you can just Google Harvard implicit test, and they should, or projective test. Either one will get you there, and it'll get you to the exams, and you can actually take them online, and you could be normed with people throughout the world that have taken hundreds of thousands of people that have taken these exams for any type of potential bias. Criterion measuring instruments. You have the validity measurements. Again, I'm sort of running out of time, so I'm not going to go too much into this, but just to let you know that there's cognitive validity, criterion related validity, construct validity, and consequential validity. Okay, factors that threaten validity are very important. Okay, unclear test directions. Sometimes I'm guilty of that, particularly, and you can let me know if I am, if I don't map out my directions as correctly as I should in the quizzes. Confusing or ambiguous test items. People don't understand the items. Vocabulary may be too difficult. I've been sort of recently accused of this in a survey that I created and for youth, and I was told that the terms I was using were were too big of terms for this population. Overly difficult and complex sentence structures, you got to simplify them. Inconsistent and subjective scoring methods. Untaught items included on achievement tests. Failure to follow the procedures, and good old cheating. And if you want the validity standards here, this publication here, I'm not sure if it's been updated since, but this one still has, it's a very good source. Okay, reliability of measuring instruments, okay? This is important to understand this. Although a valid test is always reliable, a reliable test is not always valid, okay? So reliability is dependability and trustworthy of the instruments, making sure that they're going to measure what it is that you want to measure. And here's a lot of terminology that is associated with reliability of instruments. Selecting a test or an instrument, first you have to look for one. I'm going to, like I said, the next video will show an example on how I might go about doing that. You try to find several tests that may measure what you want. You look for these instruments in dissertations. So we're going to go back and go to the thesis dissertation abstract database to try to find an instrument. Construct tests, and when you can't find a test, you have to create your own essentially. And I, a lot of times, end up doing a lot of this myself. And test administration, just knowing that if you're going to be administering a test in school, that there's an IRB, that the principal knows that you're doing it, that there's somebody monitoring for cheating. Not that high schoolers cheat or anything, just saying this is avoiding validity, invalidity in the exam, you know, external validity, and doing multiple tests, pre-post, trying to control for the conditions, etc. Okay, these are just some samples here of, you can sort of Google these or Google Scholar these, or you could go to the Fresno State database and type these in. These will be good examples for you to look at sort of the methods. This one you don't go like earlier when we did the search of the dissertation in the dissertation database. Same way, you can pull these up the same way, but this time you're not going to go and look at the method section. You're not going to go look at the literature review section. You're going to go look at chapter 3, the methodology, to understand sort of what they've done, and these will be very good examples for you.